Everybody, and welcome to our CYCJ webinar, Understanding and Contextualising the Social Harms Facing Care Experience Children and Young People in Scotland and Wales. I'm Fiona Dyer, I'm Director, and I'm really pleased to be joined by our colleagues at Swansea University, Dr. Anthony Charles, and soon to be Dr. Alaina Turner, who's going to be discussing her research with us today. Anthony and Alaina are good friends of ours, and Anthony was an associate of CYCJ and has spoken at our conferences and events before, so a familiar face to many of you, I'm sure. So today we're going to be looking at the research undertaken at Swansea University in collaboration with CYCJ, sorry, can't speak, which is sought to explore and contextualise the social harms faced by children in Scotland and Wales. So really looking forward to hearing the research today. Today's webinar is going to be recorded and will be available after today's event on the CYCJ website. There's also going to be time for questions today, so please do put them in the chat function and I will try my best to get through them all at the end. But without further ado, I will hand you over to Anthony and Alaina. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for attending. Today, we're going to look at the research that I carried out, and there's a couple of things that we're going to cover within this presentation. First, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the PhD that I carried out and the reasons behind that particular topic that I've covered. Then we're going to place care and social harm in context. So I'm going to explain to you why, or Ant is going to help me as well, explain why these two things are inextricably linked. We're going to then look at the nature and the extent of those harms as uncovered by the study, by the children who are experiencing it, and of course by those who work with those children. We're then going to look at effective and ineffective practices in Scotland and Wales, and we're going to look at some recommendations for change. And at the end, then we'll have time for some questions if anybody has any questions for me or for Ant, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so this seminar is the result of an ESRC funded PhD that I carried out in Swansea University. My interest in this area began by speaking to adults who had care experience as children, and I was struck by the similarities that they experienced and how those experiences that they had as children shaped them as adults and kind of stayed with them into adulthood. I wanted to understand why, if their negative experiences were so widespread, why they kept occurring. And I'm talking about adults that have got years in between them and the same themes just kept coming through again and again. And I wanted to understand that just a little bit more. So zemiology, the study of social harm, is an ideal theory to apply when we're looking at these cases, as it looks to examine systemic harms that lead to poor outcomes. And it gives focus then to hidden harms for a very hidden population. For those of you who don't know, so the heading of the PhD is there. It's called, for those who don't know how to pronounce it, it's pronounced Cynefin, a zemiological examination into vulnerable children in Wales and Scotland. So why did I choose the word Cynefin? For those who don't know, there's no direct translation into English of Cynefin. When you look at dictionaries, it gives you the term of habitat. But there's actually much, much more to the meaning of Cynefin. It means a feeling of being of a place, the elements and experiences of our environment, what influences us and how we see the world, how it shapes our identity, how it shapes our well-being. It is a feeling of belonging, something that many of the children and the adults that I spoke to in this study feel are still missing from their lives. Okay. So I'm going to give you a bit of context about the main elements of the study and the pillars that inform it. I'm going to talk about the study and the thesis, and then Ant's going to give you some background on some context on zemiology and devolution, which is a state that obviously both Scotland and Wales are in. So I'll start with the study. The PhD's been just over 4 years in the making. Longest 4 years of my life, I think. And the study took place, the study that underpins this thesis, it took place in Wales and in Scotland. And I want to ensure that you know that it's not as a comparison. I didn't do this as a comparison with Wales and Scotland. They were chosen for particular reasons. There is a level of devolved powers that even though they both have devolved powers, it differs between them. But they are both multi-level form of governance. They both have a multi-level form of governance, and they're both right-respecting nations, especially where children are concerned. They both have really high levels of children in care as well, which is another really important factor. So this is why the reason that Wales and Scotland were chosen, not as a comparison, but more because of their alignment, and let's see, you know, how things unfold between them. The participants were 3 groups. There were 3 groups of participants for the study. There were children aged from 10 to 17, adults aged from 18 to 35. Both of these groups had care experience as children. And then the 3rd group were the professionals who worked with or cared for care experienced children. The 3rd group then could include social workers, foster parents, 3rd sector key workers, care home workers, and educational professionals. The study was formed from a qualitative design to ensure that the thoughts and the feelings of the participants were captured. I used semi-structured interviews with the addition of visual timelines, and some online surveys were sent out as well. So I'm going to hand over to Ant, who's going to give you some background on the next part of the slides.
Thanks, Alaina. Yes, Alaina's mentioned already a couple of times the importance of social harm in understanding the life experiences and the trajectories of those who are care experienced. And I think what is quite novel about the research that Alaina led was that she adopted this zemiological approach. As I always say when I speak to my students, it always sounds like a rather grand word, but it actually has, the actual study of zemiology actually has some real power in terms of understanding the lives of those who are most vulnerable. Now, Alaina mentioned zemiology and its ability to look at systemic harm that's caused. But I mean, I put on the screen for you all there 3 quotes which I think are very important. I mean, Alaina and I both work in a criminology department of a university, and zemiology is very much a radical perspective that we use to understand harm. Now, just to put this into context, when we talk about crimes, we tend to talk about legal harms. So someone is offended against, and the criminal law understands specific offences, specific sanctions, and potentially specific outcomes as well. But what we wanted to do in this research was to go a step further and say, what were those hidden harms that were being experienced by those young people and some adults now when they were care experienced? Where were those places where the state let them down? Not in a way which potentially was jurisdictionally negative, but in terms of what that did to them as people. And in terms of the use of zemiology, the study was intentionally designed to shift away from simple processes and legal obligations to what's happened to those young people as individuals, as people who have particular understandings of the world around them, and to move much more into the realm of have the actions of the state been trauma creating? Has it damaged in some way those individuals? How did we understand them? And more than simply understanding it, I mean, Alaina will talk about this at the end, she mentioned in the agenda slide, there will be some recommendations based on the experiences of those individuals as to how the systems can be made better. Some of that may involve legal reform, but it also involves a better understanding by state actors of the harms that their actions, sometimes unintentionally, can create. Devolution's been mentioned. Please don't worry, I'm not going to give a lecture on constitutional law, but I think it's important to focus on why, again, to take it forward a little bit what Alaina said. You know, in Wales and Scotland, we've been on similar but distinct journeys since our referenda back in 1998 to create the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Senedd. And although we are devolved nations, the settlements for each country are different. I often refer to Scotland as being a bit more Devo Max than Wales. We've had a much slower trickle of power coming from Westminster down to Cardiff. But despite that, both of our nations have been, not simply because the Government of Wales and the Government of Scotland Act require it, a commitment to human rights, but they've also been very proactive in terms of children's rights. You know, in 2011, for example, the Rights of Children and Persons measure, primary legislation at that point, was enacted in Wales. Wales became the first nation in the UK to partially incorporate the UNCRC. You guys in Scotland have beat us and gone much further. So with the UNCRC Incorporation Act of 2024, you're now on a really exciting journey to take that further. And I say those things because they're very important to this research. You know, the rhetoric of children's rights, of international law regarding children's rights, is we want to foster the support services for children, the respect for children, the listening to voices of children, that they're all entitled to, particularly those who are vulnerable. I think it's fair to say that that's one of the underpinning aims of this and principles of this research was to give power to the voice of those who often aren't heard. I mean, I put on the screen there, you know, when we look at the convention and the UNCRC, there are some, you know, across the entire convention, there are really powerful statements about what children should be provided with. But, you know, I put a few examples there. I've just mentioned Article 12, the hearing of voice and the listening to voice, not just hearing, but listening and respecting voice. We've got the best interests of children. Again, you will see from the data that will come later, the really big challenges around acting in the best interest of children. But we also have to recognise as well, to counterbalance some of the very positive rhetoric around the policy agenda of children's rights, that both of our nations have actually been impaired in some ways by what has happened in the Westminster government with the austerity measures that were taken. Alaina and I were literally before lunch chatting about the importance, for example, of social spaces for children, proper funding for local government. All of these things are absolutely necessary to enable us to be rights-respecting nations. And in many ways, our progressive, important agendas have been hampered by that lack of support from the UK Treasury. That doesn't, however, diminish, as is very, very evident in Scotland with your 2024 legislation, the real importance and the understanding that taking forward a rights-based approach to protect those who are most vulnerable in particular, why that still matters so very much. Okay, I'll hand back to Alaina.
Okay, so the rest of my presentation will concentrate on the findings of the study. I'm going to tell you what those with care experience thought of the care systems that they were part of, the harms that they experienced or witnessed others experiencing during their time then living or working in the care system. Throughout this whole thesis, the thesis that I wrote, I used the voice of the participants strongly out of respect for them to ensure that their voice is heard again and again. And also this is something then that I've repeated in this presentation. So many of the slides that you're about to see will contain the voice of the participants of the study. And just to emphasize that, I'll start with what Karen has said, which is, but I think we just need to put the child's voice back at the forefront, which is the idea of it. Okay. So in their voice. In this part, I'm gonna highlight the 4 themes that were part of the study. And these themes then were prevalent across all 3 groups. So the children, the adults with care experience, and also the professionals then that worked with them. And don't forget, when I talk about the professionals, I'm talking about those that care for them as well, the foster parents, in addition to anybody that was doing it for a job, you know, so people who were actually caring for these children. The 4 themes then, the role of social services and other key workers, it was the largest of the themes, and it was something that every single participant had an opinion on in some shape or form, some positive, some negative, some had both positive and negative things to say about this area. The extremes of fostering covered the good and the bad experiences of children had, and of course the foster parents' experiences as well. Harm to crime looked at how easy the children experiencing social harm can slip into criminogenic behaviour. And then the final theme then looked at the emotional perspectives of the children, the adults, and those that worked with them. So let's start with the first theme, the role of social services and other key workers. As Lila says, well, I kind of got told when I went into foster care that it was short term, but it hasn't been short term because I've been in since I was 13. Lila was 18 at the time of the interview. You find that quite a lot as well. It's like they just can't tell you the truth. You need telling the truth, so I know what to do here. And Fiona says, I've been doing this for 6 years. I'm on at least number 10 for my social worker. He's on his 3rd social worker and he's 10 months old. Yeah, there's no consistency with that, she says. So this theme examined the positive and negative relationships with social services and other key workers from the perspective of the child, the adult, and their relationships with other key workers. In many cases, social workers and social services were in general mistrusted or even disliked. The reasons for this are quite complex. In some cases, the child felt that they were hiding the truth, sometimes relating to when they can go back to their birth parents, or separation from their siblings was a very important one that they covered. Broken promises are always remembered. Now, it doesn't matter if the social worker knows what the truth is or doesn't know what the truth is. If they say something to that child, they will remember it. Another reason for was the infrequent visits by social workers. When a social worker doesn't attend to the child very often, it's very difficult for that child to have a relationship with them. There were instances where the foster parent felt that their child wasn't visited enough and could see situations where the child was just not engaging with them at all. And it's very difficult to do that when you're only visiting occasionally. Another part of this that causes a problem is the high turnover of social workers. As you can see from the quotes above, there's an absolute lack of bonding there. The children and the foster parents alike don't have the opportunity to bond with these people. They have to earn their trust, and it's very difficult to do that when you have a really high turnover of social workers and the social workers are changing all of the time. There's a lack of attention once they were in a settled placement. There were a few children and adults that mentioned that they felt because their placement was viewed as stable, that they were ignored by social services. They hardly ever came to see them and never asked if they were okay. This ignorance obviously leads to the child's mistrust then of social services and all adults in some cases. It causes problem with the foster parents, educational professionals and other key workers, as well as the children themselves. Not passing on records was another big problem that was encountered. If the social worker changed or a key worker changed, or they were shifted from one department to another, they would effectively have to start again. And the child would get sick of telling their story, and at some points would completely disengage with all social services and most adults as well. So the social workers are overworked. There's a lack of staff in the departments. They have too much paperwork to do, and there's not enough then engagement with the children. Some social workers I spoke to expressed their concern, and as they've seen the job change over the years, that they used to be able to spend so much more time with children, and that time is gone now from the engagement that they have to make with the paperwork that they have to carry out. So they're aware that they're overworked and they're not providing a good a service as they feel they used to be able to provide. Some children are being taken care of by unqualified social workers. There was quite a lot of cases where the trainee social workers would become the child's main social worker, and due to staff shortages, they just wouldn't be trained. So from the social worker themselves, it's a tough gig because they're thrown in while they're training, thrown in at the deep end to really quite complex cases. And then again, from the child, is the child getting really the best that they can, the best care that they can, if these social workers are not fully trained. Of course, they're getting paid less, and they're working twice as hard. So it's a very difficult one. In addition, then onto the next slide, we can talk about key workers and how that they were regarded in almost all cases in a completely different view to social workers. As Edward explains, she helps me. She gives me advice on like what to do and what not to do, and that. She actually knows everything as well. Like there's someone new comes in and they have to go through everything, like, but she knows everything already. It's like all on paper and everything's been said. So it's difficult for us to understand that. That should be commonplace. But as a child, he saw that some people didn't know his story and had to ask all the questions again. And it was such a revelation for him to have this key worker that came in and just knew everything already because it was all written down, you know. Parker talks about a really important key worker that worked with them. And he says, I saw the support worker more than the social worker. She said, you know, you had a shit time and you've got two ways you can go now. You can either carry on doing what you're doing and end up in prison, and God knows where, or you can make a change and not let the people who abuse you in your life win and actually make something of yourself. I lay a lot of gratitude on her doorstep because really the life I was living at that point, you know, had I not made the change. So trust, affection, listening, being interested in them. These were all the things that the children and adults told me that they felt the key workers provided. They felt seen by them and they felt heard by them. These attributes can make a massive difference to vulnerable children. Interestingly, even though through care and aftercare teams in Scotland work for social services, they are really highly regarded by the young people that they help and the young people that I spoke to, and also by other professionals. There is a worry here because there is a lack of uptake with through care and aftercare, which I'll discuss later, and only 49% at the moment of those who are eligible for it are receiving it. And this number is actually falling instead of increasing, but I'll cover through care and aftercare a little later on. Another real big issue with key workers is the lack of stability. Key workers are generally funded by grants, or the grants, the funding that they have is very short-lived. And so if there comes to a point where that funding ends, that key worker will leave and generally not be replaced. And of course, that adds then to that child's feeling of abandonment that they kind of gets repeated through their life. So we're going to move on to the second theme, which is the extremes of fostering. And let me tell you something that Fiona and Parker said about fostering. Fiona says, he was in his school all day and then after school club till 5 o'clock. He came home, he had his tea, and then he had to go to his room, and that was his life. When he came to me, he was 8 years old, and he asked, when I met him, will I have to stay in my room? Can I come on holiday with you? Because some carers don't like to take their children on holiday. And Parker says, I don't think it was ever a foster family for me. It was somebody's house that I lived in, and I very much felt that. It was a definite separation. I had to keep my towel separate to theirs on the landing, and I wasn't allowed to have my dressing gown in the bathroom with all the others. For most, fostering is seen as the best outcome for children who end up in local authority care, and there are some wonderful examples of foster families out there. Yet those that are negative stay with that child into adulthood. They include change in the rule dynamics, and by that I mean you can have a child that's lived a very loose life with regard to rules and regulations, and when they're taken into a foster family, it is good to have rules and regulations for a child, but the switchover sometimes is just so quick and so extreme that they really do feel stifled, and it's about understanding what they've come from and how to get to where you need them to be without making that switch immediately. Adolescence was a massive problem as well. A lot of situations where we found the foster placement had broken down, had happened during that time. And I'll cover a little more on adolescence a bit later. And of course, the feeling, as Parker has explained it, as an exclusion from the family unit that's within foster care. In addition, there is a massive lack of suitable homes available for children coming into care. And there are more people leaving foster care every year due to lack of support from social services. There's this problem of numbers of family homes available causes a big problem when it comes to matching the right children to the right homes. Some social workers spoke of times where they would have a list of people that they would go through, and then they would narrow that down, and children would be introduced to these families slowly. We don't have that now. There's no matching because there are no alternatives. If a family becomes available, then that child goes there. These children are kind of thrown together rather than introduced. So Fiona says a couple of weeks ago, they had children in caravans, Airbnbs being staffed by social workers because they've not got enough foster carers to take care of them. I think we are at a point where I think something bad is going to happen because obviously the lack of foster carers. And Parker says, I don't think there's enough choice for children at this point. It's kind of, if we get someone to accept a child, we take it. We've got foster carers on our books that we wouldn't leave our own children with. Quite strong there, I think. The lack of foster homes is a concern for professionals who fear that circumstances are going to escalate and nothing is being done to address it. There seems to be a shift to familial care, and this is particularly prevalent, I found, in Scotland, where this type of care has increased by 10% to 34% in recent years. So children in care arrangements are more increasingly being placed with their family. And whereas there is good understanding of why this is done, it can also come with some disadvantages, such as overcrowding, lack of social services support, and financial hardship as well. Teenage years as well can be really tricky for families to navigate. Many of the children who have had breakdowns in their placement occurs through these teenage years, as I spoke of earlier, and as they move into adolescence. Through one or two incidents, whether that's smoking, drinking, staying out late, the barriers that most adolescents push as they're moving through their life, these are instances that can make them lose their home. These are much less tolerated in foster families, especially when they feel social services are not supporting them. Again, the child will go through feelings of abandonment once that home breaks down and they have to move on to somewhere else. And again, the somewhere else are few and far between. So moving on to the third theme that I covered within the study, or I found within the study, and this is harm to crime. I'll read to you what the participant said. Nadia said, she phoned saying she was suicidal, but in her ASBO it says she wasn't allowed to cause public fear and alarm. So they lifted her because she called the police station. Erin said, I may have sold a few bits of weed. Basically, that's how I had to, you know what I mean? Yeah, oh God, but it was the only way I could have gone to uni. And Casey said, they put me in a unit type thing with all different people and I ended up addicted to drugs. I was drinking every day and I wasn't going to college. It was just constant violence. We were always getting arrested. It was just chaos. It can be easy for children and young people to fall onto the wrong side of the justice system. This can happen at the best of times. Some situations with care experienced children can increase that likelihood. Sometimes due to lack of emotional support, sometimes lack of appropriate funding, as we see with Erin. In some cases, the study found that placing many teenagers together, such as in units, compounded this issue, as Casey is talking about. I do believe that from the study, from the children and young people that I spoke to, many of the units that they were talking about are either closed down or were actually in the process of being closed down at the time. So I'm not sure how much of a problem that still is in Scotland. So on to the last theme that I discussed within the thesis, and that is the theme of belonging. And these comments I'll read to you before I discuss with you what that actually means. So this would be around the time of Every Child Matters. But then I don't feel like I did matter. It didn't help me, or it didn't feel like it helped me. David, when asked how he felt in his foster care, said, no, I'd much rather live with my parents. I never understood the reason I was put into foster care. I've never had that explained to me. And Lily says, the social workers should create the life stories. They're meant to, but they're very basic. When they do story work, there's always a lot of information missing. When they had their story work, the boys had these amazing books. Why should only my children have amazing books? Everybody should have amazing life story work. So before I discuss with you about life story work, I want to explain that the emotional challenges that facing children with care experience is examined strongly within this theme. How strong role models can influence them, how their experiences shape their future choices that they've made in their life, and what they want to say to the children coming up behind them in the care system. So the type of home lives children with care experience leave behind can be chaotic and unstable. The last thing they need then is to continue that chaos and instability when they're in care, but that is exactly what happens to some children. Some just have no idea why they're in care. So life story work happens in Wales, not as much as it should, which I'll discuss in a minute, but it basically allows the child to discuss with an appropriate adult, which is usually the social worker, what has happened to them in their life up to that point. They can go through all sorts of documents that social services have on them, photographs from their life with their family, if there are any available. They can discuss what happened and why they're in care. Somebody explained very, very clearly to me, a professional, it's very easy to talk to children from care when they have life story work, because it says to them, A, B, and C happened, and that's why you're in care. It's not to do with you. It's not your fault. These things happened. Mummy and Daddy couldn't look after you, and now you're in this place. It's very important for them to have a sense of belonging and a sense of past and a link to where they have come from. In Wales, life story work should be mandatory. It's not always delivered, and when it is, They could be waiting for many, many years before the appropriate person even starts working on it with them. And for many years, and in between people, the quality differs. As you can see from Lily's comment there, the person that created the life story work for her foster children had, it was their job to do that. That's what they did for a living. They created and they developed these beautiful books out of their life story work. Whereas other people, they just kind of have a folder with some stuff in, sometimes a box with some pictures in, and that's about as strong as it gets. So when we look at David's comments, who says, I'd much prefer we lived with my parents, I never really understood why I was put into foster care. David had been in a stable placement for 5 years. There was no reason for him not to have had his life story work done at that point in time. But he didn't know. He still didn't know. He was getting towards the end of his time in school, and he did not know why he was in care. So a positive life story can help the child understand why they're in care and that none of it is their fault and that they are worthy of happiness. Heather says, don't let the past define who you are. It may have happened, but it wasn't your choice and it wasn't your fault. Don't make it like it was your fault, because it wasn't. And Nadia says, there's no positive role model, yet one, and he was actually an ex-police officer and he took them out. You know, he did adventure stuff. He did go like, you know, paddleboarding with them and hiking, and it made a massive difference to his offending, his behaviour and his attendance at school. It turned that child's life around. Positive role models can be lacking from a child's life in general, in sheltered housing or in units especially, unless they're really lucky enough to get a good key worker that works there. The findings show that while those with care experience were not always sure of why they were in care, what happened, and who made the decisions for them, they were always sure of how they felt at the time, whether that was loved, neglected, secure, or lonely. So moving on from the findings and the themes, I want to talk about what worked, what the positives were, and there were many positives throughout the study. Things that help children feel safe, worthy, and a desire to improve their lives and go somewhere. The two I've selected, some to look at today, are relationships and connections and the through care and aftercare scheme. And Heidi summed it up pretty well for me. I think it's like everything. You just have to have the right people looking after you. Yeah, the right people supporting you and your parents supporting that. And then children are more likely to flourish. So let's start with relationships and connections. This was quite a lovely area to look at. Very sad in some cases, but in some cases the kids really told the story well. Tom talks of his first social worker, as it happens. She was lovely, she was amazing and a really good social worker. She gave me my first ever book, which was The Hobbit. She was a very bubbly and jolly person, and I felt that she listened. Heather. We just feel like a real family because they included me, they cared for me, they protected me when I needed protecting and things like that. So that's what I feel like. And Parker talking of his first, but unfortunately short-lived foster care. I remember thinking, oh my God, this is what love is meant to feel like. This is important to all children in all spaces. Sorry. From the relationships with their social workers and key workers to the placement they are living in. Whether it's a foster family, a familial placement, or children and young people's home, or even a secure home. It's the people who care for them and that listen to them that make the difference. Sometimes it just takes one person in their whole life, or all the many people that are caring for them, to make that difference for them. I want to talk a little about the through care aftercare scheme. This was something that I actually found out about while I was doing the study in Scotland, and I was really impressed with how children and professionals alike really rated the scheme. They really think it works well. It's provided for those who don't know about the Through Care and After scheme. It's provided for children in Scotland to help make that difficult transition from care and into adulthood. If it's applied for, they can disengage with their social worker at 16, and then they engage with the Through Care and After Care team instead. And that team will stay with them then until their 26th birthday. Since 2013, the uptake of this service has fallen from 69% to 49%. The Scottish Government seem to be unaware of why that's happened. But some professionals I spoke to say they think it could be to do with the lack of trust that young people have with social services. If they've had enough bad experiences with them up to 16, then they're happy to leave social services behind and not re-engage with another team. So they want to get away from social services altogether. If they spent most of their life under their control, you can understand why they would be a bit hesitant about continuing that until they were 26. Yet everyone I spoke to that was within Through Care and After Care team, or that had experience with the Through Care and After Care team, only said positive things about it. It actually changed lives. So Lila says, I have them until I'm 26. Yeah, it's good. I have someone there if I need help. They come up and see me every fortnight. He goes and takes me for something like a bite to eat or to have a conversation about what's happening. And Nadia says, he's worked with Through Care and After Care worker for 8 years and they have a great relationship with her. So it's like, I suppose, getting them when you can. And by that, she means trying to engage them with social services because they know, with Through Care After Care, because they know that it's going to be a good experience for them if they can get it in there. So what things need to change? There are a few things I identified that need to change both in Wales and in Scotland. And I've classed these under 4 groups for the purpose of this presentation. A child's identity, one size fits all, investments in services, and investments in people. So we'll start with the child's identity. Erin says, I feel like people that have adverse childhood experiences and stuff spend so much time trying to protect themselves, trying to navigate the world, that they never have a chance to figure out what they're good at, what they like to do. So then they have this sense of, well, I'm just not good at anything. If we could have workshops to give those opportunities for people to feel like they're good at something, I feel like a lot of people might be a bit afraid to make that jump just in case things went wrong because, well, what will they have? So a child's identity covers life stories, counselling and rebuilding, and positive role models. As far as life stories are concerned, the rollout in Wales needs to improve drastically. The system that's being used at the moment is too patchy. It's not working well enough. It's too sporadic. It's a postcode lottery about what a child gets and what they're going to end up with and when they're going to get it. There seems to be a very lack of urgency within Wales about trying to get this really important benchmark for the children and under their belt. And even if that's revisited then at a later date when they're a bit older, if they're too young at the time, it needs to be done pretty much as soon as that child moves into care, not years later. I also think this is something that could be added in Scotland. When I spoke to the children and young people in Scotland about knowing where they came from and understanding their life story, where they did seem a bit more aware of what was going on. It was through what adults had been telling them, whether that's their parents or people around them, rather than any sort of official capacity. I think it's a really important part of a care experience, child's life, and something that I think Scotland would benefit from. There's a real lack of identity for these children in care as well. They feel like they are children in care first and foremost, and they have to be fit into whatever box social services have put them in. They're still not listened to in many places, and that is in Wales and in Scotland. And that kind of compounds the trauma that they're feeling and that they're going through at the time. Some children do receive counselling, not all. and if they do, it's kind of time limited, because obviously there's a cost to that. So they'll have 12 weeks of this or 10 weeks of that, which is generally not enough for most of the children I spoke to. They need to understand that what's happened is not their fault, and very few children I spoke to really got that. To discover who they are in this new world that they find themselves in, and what makes them happy, what they're good at, what drives them. The adults I spoke to that were the most content were the ones that understood these things. They were able to craft a life for themselves through their time in care and after it into adulthood. Role models are everything for children. Negative ones can guide them down the wrong path, just as positive ones can influence their behaviour, their attitude, and improve their self-worth. Strong, positive key workers are essential, and they need to be taken much more seriously. One size fits all. So, David says, they just do nothing. They're coming to see me just to tick a box. That's what it feels like. They tick a box and they throw it in the bin. That was David talking about his social worker. It was felt that there was one way that children were to be treated, whether those children fit into that picture or not. Therefore, some were given interventions that they did not need, and others were not given interventions that they did need. Sometimes they had to request interventions to be given them, but even other key workers didn't know what was available for the children, never mind the children themselves. They knew how they felt, but not necessarily what they needed. One size does not fit all. It's another example of dehumanising children through managerialism. Rarely were the children asked what they needed or what would help them, and few spoke out when they were asked, and rarely were they listened to when they gave their opinion. So investments in services, another thing that needs to improve. And Kimberly sums it up pretty well here. She says, because there's holes and cracks and people are falling through them everywhere. It's not just the children, it's the professionals as well. Definitely, because the turnaround of staff, I know with children's services, is phenomenal, isn't it? The issues that I found under this section were the availability of social workers and other key workers. The turnaround of social workers and key workers, the hours of engagement, the increasing the reach of through care and aftercare, mental health services and counselling provision. Other instability issues uncovered in the study included untrained social workers on difficult cases, as I spoke of earlier, a lack of feedback on requests from children and foster carers, missed opportunities where children should have been under social services care earlier, and some of these children found these things out into adulthood, where they realised that the social services were taking care of them when they were too young to remember, and yeah, nothing was done. And using family members to care for children who are not supported by social services. And by those things, I mean, missed opportunities is obviously a clear one to talk about. When I'm talking about lack of feedback on requests, many children had to have authorization from their parents if their parents were still in the picture for certain things. And so they would go to a social worker and ask for things. They would go to a social worker and ask if they could cut their children's hair. Sometimes that wasn't allowed. These are foster parents asking this. Children would go and ask if they could have more interaction with their siblings or with their parents, and these requests would take months and months and months. And months is a really long time in a child's life, as you all know. You know, it goes quickly for us as we get older, but for children, months is a really, really long time. And these are requests that to them are just quite simple. Can I sleep over at my friend's house? One participant spent 9 months waiting for them to come. And to be fair to the parents of the friend, they were quite happy to be checked by the police. They were quite happy for all that to take place. And 9 months later, nothing had still happened. And the foster mother got fed up of him asking in the end and just let him stay. It was like 3 doors down, you know. So these little things that the children feel are just normal things that everybody else does take months and months and months for social services to sort out. And so this lack of feedback that they're getting back, it just is really upsetting for them. The working hours are also a massive issue. Social services, as with most office workers, they work from 9 to 5. And I found a lot of issues that were happening in the evenings, they're happening over weekends, and social services were just not there. Even social services, some people themselves, some social workers themselves said to me, this happened on a Friday night, and of course I didn't get wind of it till Monday, and it was all weekend this child was in this situation. And so we apply these managerial working hours to a service that's supposed to apply to people and children. It doesn't make sense that we're allowing that to happen. So the hours of engagement really do need to be looked at when it comes to caring for children. As well as a lack of available foster placements, which I discussed earlier, and overworked social workers. The study showed a lack of trained social workers, mental health counsellors, lack of key workers, and a lack of children's homes. All of these things in place at once makes our care systems, puts them in a really precarious position. The increase in reach of through care aftercare, which I've discussed already, bringing that into Wales, I think would be a great idea from the successes that I've seen working in Scotland. Young people engaging in college that never engaged in school, really turning these young people's lives around. So I think it would be a great benefit to Wales to bring that down here. We need to find ways of improving the uptake in Scotland as well, and bringing those numbers back up instead of going down. And then the last point that I want to talk about is the investment in people. It's all well and good having an investment of money, but some people that I spoke to really felt that there was a lack of investment in people. And Patrick spoke of it quite succinctly. He said, I think what will happen in this country is someone gets hurt. Then they'll start funding these services better. When you're dealing with a young person, you do something which is traumatic and it stays with them, right? So investment in people, many people spoke about professionalising the care profession. They are underpaid and they are overworked, and that something needs to be done about that. These are caring for the most vulnerable children in society, and they're on basic minimum wage. There are excellent key workers and excellent foster carers leaving due to the lack of support that they are getting. We're not talking about money so much as support from social services and support in the jobs that they're in as well. When we talk about children's homes, they're not feeling they're getting any support from the managers above them. There was a situation where somebody was finding it difficult to employ people to work in you could call it sheltered housing. It's for young people, homes within Wales. And he was finding it difficult to get people to employ. And his manager told him, if they've got a pulse, employ them. Excellent care worker that I was made aware of, that actually I was given an example of how they turned a child's life around, left to become a train driver. Because they had better training, they had better money, and they had better respect from the managers. So before I open to questions, I want to say a massive thank you to CYCJ, because I would not have been able to carry out this really important work without them. The voices of these children would have gone unheard without their connection and without them believing in me to be able to do this. So a massive thank you to them for that. Also, thank you to the professionals who took time out of their day to work with me, all their personal hours as well, not just their working day. Those who acted as gatekeepers and allowed me to speak to the children that they were caring for and the adults they were caring for. And of course, my huge thanks go to the care experience who took their time to tell me their stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Alaina. Thank you so much, and Anthony. That was a great presentation there. please do use the chat function if you have got any questions. Alaina, there was one just at the start about just the number of children or adults with care experience and the number of professionals that were involved in your research.
Oh, right, okay, I can get that for you. It was quite funny, the reaction that I've got, and it's quite an important point actually. The professionals in Scotland seem to want to engage much more than the professionals in Wales, and I'm still unsure about why that is. They were much more open, they were much more happy to tell their story, they were much more willing to engage with what the problems were, but those in Wales were not, I don't know if they were afraid, I don't know if there was a feeling of that what they said was going to get back to their employers, whether it was going to put their jobs in difficult position, whether they were protecting the children themselves. It's difficult to know. I'll get those figures for you and I'll get back to you with those.
Okay, no worries. One thing, I suppose, for me, it was great to hear about the positive feedback about the through care in Scotland, and it is something about the lack of uptake in that we'll need to look at. But what do Wales do then in relation to through care for children and young people?
Well, not much, not much, and that's quite the scary thing. There are things that have been put in place, such as not when I'm ready, which means they don't have to leave care at 16 or 18 like they used to. They can expand that a bit longer, but that will all depend on the foster placement that they were with and whether or not that foster family want that to carry on. When it comes to universities and things like that, there are things that they can apply for to help them, funding that they can apply for that will help them. But they have, again, it's this case of knowing what's out there, because things are not naturally given to children in care. They have to apply for these things, and they have to know that these things are there to be applied for, which many people don't know. Many of us don't know what's out there. Never mind coming from an experience where you don't have parents to tell you what's out there as well. So at the moment, not much. And I think that's another reason it would be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, no, definitely. We've got a question about a lot of what you've said, it resonates with us, but it's probably some of it we've already known. So how do we impact system change? How do you achieve putting your findings into a more practical level to achieve change?
That's a really good question.
Do we offer something?
Yes, please. Yes.
I've been quiet for a long time, I'll say something. This is very unlike me. I think Yvette's question is actually a very, very good one. There's been a lot of research on care experience, and although in the foot, obviously today is a smaller amount of, a very compressed amount of data, huge amounts of data that's going to go into the final thesis. I suppose I'd offer 2 points, which I think actually could be equally applicable to Scotland and Wales. And there's actually turning back to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, first of all. If we were properly doing what government has said it wishes to do, I suspect we wouldn't have so many of the problems that we do have. So, I think there needs to be a far more, I know in Scotland it's a different situation because you're working through commencement of the Incorporation Act and preparation for that. In Wales, the legislation, our committees in the Senate have said that our rights measure isn't properly functioning, due regard duties aren't functioning. So I think at a strategic level, I think things like challenge through child rights impact assessment, potentially strategic litigation, need to happen. And although they're quite powerful tools, I think we've got to take on board. You probably saw Alaina got quite emotional with some of that. I've read through her data. Honestly, it's incredible data, and if somebody isn't upset, any policymaker or professional after reading that, then you got a heart like a swinging brick. Really, but to me, it undermines the actual importance of us trying to unclutter care systems and social services systems. They do what they are meant to do. I do think some of that comes back to this child rights-based approach. I'm hopeful both devolved governments, because of their statutory and policy commitments, can do something about that. But it's a battle. The second point I was going to say is actually activism. You know, here at the university, we've got the Observatory on the Human Rights of Children, the Children's Legal Centre Wales, and I actually think we need to be more activist. I'm not going to make a political speech, but you know, when we look at our future generations' aspirations, both in Scotland and Wales, some of our most powerful assets in our communities are our children, and when they are damaged, that damage doesn't disappear after 10 sessions of counselling. It changes them as people. It actually, in many ways, I think, robs them of their future aspirations and actually robs our society of the great asset that they are. So I think there is duty in all of us to be activists, and that in some ways is about, you know, when we have our engagement with our ministers and leaders in social service, saying, why can't we change this? Why can't we look at reprioritising budgetary provision? Why can't we do more? But asking children, like in this research, to be honest and to feed back into the system. I mean, that's one thing within Alaina's research, is that there is a participation deficit, that those who are most affected by systems, their experience isn't fed back in. So we need to have this evidence-based approach, which I think should be quite activist, frankly, in its context. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely so. There is part of my thesis where I kind of say we need to tear it down and rebuild it. You know, there's so much that's not right with it at the minute. That why not be radical? Let's rip it up and start again.
Yeah, and obviously in Scotland we had the Independent Care Review and the Promise, which aims to be radical in relation to that. But I guess, again, there's things that we can learn from here. We've still got to 2030 to put that all into action, Alaina. So Alaina, what's your plans to publish your thesis?
I don't know at the minute. Just to go back to the original question, there were 32 interviews that I carried out, and there were 14 of them with professionals, and then 18 with children and young people. So to publish, I don't have indefinite plans at the minute. There are many areas that I can go with this particular type of thesis. So social work is one area, zemiology obviously is another area, but we're looking at the moment at different journals and deciding which way we want to go ahead with it. There's lots of different stuff I can break up and push out there to make sure that lots of different types of people that need to see it are seeing the data.
Okay, and we can look at sharing that as well. Just there's a couple of people have put in about examples of good practice as well and things we're doing. There was an example just about the importance of relationships, Alaina, in Aberdeenshire, and somebody else has just posted there some interesting work in relation to life story work, and there's a link there. We've also put a link in, Anthony, about the observatory, so people down at Swansea, so people want to see that. So just following on from Yvette's question, we've been asked here, so how does or can zemiology and social harms lens help affect social change?
In the way I just described it, it's very good at understanding where things are systemically wrong and saying, right, well, we need to stop that and break it down and start again and do it properly. Zemiology is a great way of looking at hidden harms. It's a great way of understanding where things, even though things are done the right way, the correct way, within the laws and the regulations that people have, like social workers have, it can still cause harm. You know, there are things that are done and that are put in place that are not really being fully thought about. And when you turn something like this on its head and look at it semiologically, then you're saying, we're uncovering these things. We're saying, look, these are the things that you're missing here. These are the things that a managerial 9 to 5 system is just not understanding and not covering. And these are so important to every child's life that need to be looked at.
If I can add there as well, I mean, I agree, and I think there's a particular resonance in Welsh strategy around this as well. The Wales Youth Justice Blueprint predicates the whole system on being trauma-informed. Now, traumas don't necessarily flow from criminal acts or illegal acts, but they are far-reaching and they need to be discovered in order to be supported, else, you know, as Alaina said earlier, further descent into the system can occur. So I think one of the things that certainly we'd be looking to do is to look at this model of zemiological analysis and say, we need to scrape beyond the process. I mean, as Alaina correctly said, that in very few circumstances, people done things which are a breach of process or a statute. However, there may be an unintended consequence of further damage to the child. And where that occurs, then this can highlight, actually, we need to reform that process, we need to reform that legislation. You know, things like the aftercare through care.
Yeah.
There's such fantastic feedback, and you know, why isn't great effort being made by government to push that? It's a fantastic scheme. You want to give every child, and we all know that you know, without telling people how to suck eggs, we know there are significant challenges of transition out of care.
Yeah.
If these positive schemes are working, let's push them, because they help to address some of these challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. So a couple more questions. Did you look at children with disabilities?
No, no. That wasn't, unfortunately, wasn't part. There were children with learning difficulties and addressed their own issues, but I didn't feel like they were in any way, and they didn't feel like they were in any way different to other children that I was talking to, so which is the most important thing. So there was no specifically looking at that. I think that could have been a thesis on its own. If we look at of children with disabilities in care, that would that would be in a whole new area.
Okay, yeah, okay. So somebody else is saying they've been doing some research and looking at the role of non-statutory bodies, third sector partners, to support care experienced young people as they navigate the youth justice system. And was that a theme that came out of your findings?
Yeah, well, very much so. When you're looking at the key workers, it was the third sector and the non-statutory people that tended to be of the most help to children. But again, we're looking there at very low funding and very reduced funding. So it comes to a point where sometimes they'll know they've got 2 years to do that job, and then what happens then?
Yeah. So
stability of key workers really needs to be looked at. Yeah.
I think there's another question that probably links to that as well. I think about young people leaving care, looking at employment, but coming over barriers like housing barriers, the increased cost of living, benefits allowance, impact on the career progression, and it's about all these neat figures. And at no fault of the young people. So how do we overcome barriers and challenges that these young people are facing?
I think the Through Care After team do that brilliantly. They are equipped with information that can help these young people. Some I was talking to, they were helped to budget, so they knew they never realised before how to budget, and some of the workers that were working with them taught them how to budget. Some helped them get housing, some helped them to furnish that housing. There were incredible stories of the Through Care After team just going above and beyond, and being in a position where they could understand what the child was needing. And this is moving away from the one size fits all that social services seem to do so well. The Through Care After team were not one size fits all. The Through Care After team were all about, well, let's look at this individual and see what we need to build around them to help them move wherever it is they need to move, whether that's back home with their families or whether it's to create their own little house and their own little flat and then move on from there. So teams like that are essential in helping these vulnerable children move on.
I think there's a policy thing to add in as well. I mean, I won't say too much for this, but very happy to share with people links. I mean, the Welsh Government has been piloting a type of universal income for those involved with care experience as well. Now, it's at the early stages, but look at Harrod's question there. I completely agree with him. I mean, there's two things really. One is a lack of material resources. The other is, frankly, stigmatization of these young people as well. And there are some, both in Wales and there's been similar pilots across Europe. Some of that type of approach, well, to give those young people a ladder up into society and support. They may be something that could be done. But again, we're back to the sort of activism argument, aren't we? That you would need central government, whether that's central or devolved government, to actually want to invest in that. Unfortunately, there's no easy solution for that. And we know, for example, care experience people tend to be less likely to be mainstream education, then there needs to be a very honest conversation about what we can do to hold people in systems. And I always call it bubble wrapping, wrap as much support as we can around them to hold them there, give them the best start. And it all sounds very cliche at times, but these things can be done.
Yeah, just one thing on the income scheme that the Welsh Government were bringing in. There was I think it was about either 2 or 4 years. There was if they were born between this time and they turned 18 between this time, and that was the pilot that they were using, and that is being assessed. The data is being assessed by Cascade, I believe, in Cardiff, and but that's stopped now. So they're not going to be doing any more of that until they've had these figures analysed and they know whether it's right or whether it's wrong. And part of the problem that we've got there is our First Minister has changed over. There's no way of knowing whether our new First Minister is as committed to this pilot scheme as the previous one was. And so there is a concern now that they've got this data, and yes, they're going off and working with it, but there's other children turning 18 as this time is ticking on, and they don't have the support that this pilot group did. So it feels a bit disjointed there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, some of the chat's been there. I think what you were going back to saying, that sort of bubble wrap, Anthony, and just going above and beyond. And I think we've got examples there, and that is, I suppose, for us, it's about the promise, it's about relationships, it's about love, it's about doing that step further. And it's not just, I think, that 9 to 5, and it's looking at the whole child and how we can support the whole child. The Aberdeen case example there, they were saying that young people are writing their own reports for reviews and having more control over their own stories, which is brilliant to hear. That's the first I've heard of that as well. We've been doing a lot in Scotland about language. And we've got within our Hearing's Our Voice young people about what language they don't want to have used about them and used to to describe them and describe their behaviour. So there's been a lot of work, I think, in Scotland trying to influence professionals about the language they use. So that's great to hear that's going a step further even and putting that into practice and allowing children and young people to do that. So that's great. If you can share that either on the chat if it's published, or with us, we can see how we can share that out at CYCJ. So we're also got here just about trauma-informed support from workers is key for care experienced children and young people. They access the information in a safe way. Yeah, definitely in some of the work they're doing there. That's great. Okay, that's it there. Thank you so much, Michelle. Relationships recording and keeping the promise. So that's really great to hear these examples. So it'll be good, Alaina, I think if you are writing up your thesis, sharing your thesis, doing it in smaller chunks, I imagine it's massive, looking at how we can share that. And I think it's about putting that into practice to really make, going back to like Yvette's question, make real change on the ground, and how can we influence that? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. That's brilliant. Thank you. Is there any more questions before we finish up? I think I've covered all the questions, but I don't know, Anthony, can you say have I covered them all? We've got some information there about UNCRC and children who, the rights of children who are disabled, and yep, appreciate that. I think it is probably a whole PhD in its own right. Yeah. And people are just sharing some of their own resources. We've put in details so you can get in touch with Anthony and Alaina. They are at Department of Criminology, Sociology and Social Policy at Swansea University, and there's a link to the observatory there. Obviously, there's a link to the CYCJ website, our future webinars and our e-bulletin that we send out once a month. If anyone is interested and not already on it, please do sign up. But if there's no further questions, I would just like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have. And thank you to Anthony and Alaina for sharing your research with us. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.